Hi, my name is Jade. I'm predominantly a lurker over here on Booktube. I mostly post over on Booktok, TikTok, but I've been getting a lot of requests from people, and this is something I've been wanting to do myself too, which is to compile, certain videos to become one and post them here because especially for the last year, I've been doing an in-depth literary analysis / dissection of certain popular series, and there are certain ones that are starting to get buried in my feed because sadly I don't have quite enough followers to get the playlist setting, and I just want to put them all in one place. So that being said, these videos are coming directly from my TikTok. I'm not refilming anything, so I'm still going to keep the title cards, which I think should be useful because it's going to tell you exactly what chapters I'm talking about. And I'm very excited for more people to maybe discover them, or I've had a few people saying that they've seen my other videos and they just want it all in one place to rewatch or listen because they found it helpful for some reason. But just to let you know, if you have not seen my videos, the way that I do my literary analysis is that I am actively reading the book, and as I actively read them, I am just picking apart literally whatever detail just comes up in that chapter or sentence, and look at the layers behind the sentences, because Holly Black's really good at presenting something one way, but there being so many layers beneath it. I talk about the characters and their psyche and their development. I talk about things such as nature versus nurture. And as I do so, I also, just as to let you know, I talk about the entirety of the trilogy, so there would be spoilers for the entirety of it, but I also bring up details from the spin-off The Stolen Heir and also the other book Darkest Part of the Forest, because it's in the same world. But with those two books, I don't spoil the plot of those books. I just bring up random details that are useful for whatever I'm talking about in the moment. So I hope you continue to watch the rest of this video, and I hope you enjoy it. And if you want to leave a comment, let me know what other books you'd like me to maybe do along the same lines, do a literary, analysis dissection. I would love recommendations. I have a couple more I'm hoping to get through. And as I'm actively posting this video, I'm also currently working on The Stolen Heir. So check out the rest of this video. So since I had a really fun time doing a literary analysis of the entire Hunger Games series, I decided I want to do it again with my other favorite series, which is the Cruel Prince series. And even though I own multiple copies of the book, I decided this read-through I want to do my LitJoy copy because I have not yet, and it has special annotations from Holly Black in it. However, I feel like I need to wear gloves while I'm reading this. I don't want to get it dirty. It's so beautiful. But if you have not seen my Hunger Games literary analysis dissection, just to give you a heads up, I am basically going to be rereading this book and making videos of my thoughts as I am actively reading it. I'm going to try to look into things such as nature versus nurture, gender expectations, power dynamics, control, things like that. Just whatever comes to mind as I'm actively reading. Before I get started, I just want to show off some of the artwork. There's so much in this book, but just look at it! Look at it! I love it. I love immediately they're talking about how Vivi may look different, but Taryn and Jude are also different too because they were identical twins, and that's an anomaly in both the human and fairy world. No matter what, they would have stood out. And so she says Vivi's eyes and the lightly furrowed points of her ears were to Jude not so much more strange than being the mirror version of another person. When Jude thinks that, other parents are always whispering about Vivi, she says, but grown-ups are always worried, always whispering. And at first you go, oh, okay, and move on. But knowing the book now, I'm like, oh, you're subtly telling us that it doesn't mean anything to her because she's used to it, because her parents are always worried because they're probably worried about Maddox catching up to them. I also love the use of weather because she's describing this day as being the sun was shining, so it doesn't seem ominous that basically her whole world is about to be turned upside down in the next 10 seconds. I love this paragraph because she says outside the sun was shining, scorching the asphalt of the driveway, lawnmowers, engines whirled, and children splashed in the backyard pools. Dad was in the outbuilding where he had a forge. Mom was in the kitchen cooking hamburgers. Everything was boring. Everything was fine. So basically she's saying that despite their appearances, they were trying to live a normal, boring life, and to Jude it was already boring even though she doesn't know any different. It's interesting when Maddox asks whose child is this, her mother says no one's. She doesn't lie and said, oh, it's the neighbor. She doesn't lie and say something else. She says no one's child. And it's fascinating because later in the book we see that Jude is struggling because she feels like she is no one in the world of fairy. I also love how Holly Black writes lines that feel like she plucked them right from another fairy tale. They're perfectly whimsical and abstract. With Maddox saying, I've seen many impossible things. I have seen the acorn before the oak. I have seen the spark before the flame, but never have I seen such as this. A dead woman living, a child born from nothing. The prologue isn't super long, but there's so much in there that is kind of little kernels or seeds being planted of what is going to happen later in the story. So because of that, and I'll be talking about it in this video and I talked about it in the previous video, This is going to be broken into 2 parts, so welcome to part 2 of the prologue. When her mother says to Maddox, I was never going to be happy with you. Your world isn't for people like me. It's fascinating because it's setting up the whole like conflict going forward. Like Vivi feels that way too. Like the world isn't meant for me, even though Vivi truly belongs in that world. And yet Jude is trying to force her way into that world. She thinks that she belongs in that world. We're also seeing the other conflict begin to be set up with Maddox asking the question, what is a promise from a mortal wife worth? I suppose I might answer. Basically, Jude is working at a disadvantage in their world because they assume mortals cannot keep their promises, that they wiggle out of deals because they can lie. So Jude has to go above and beyond to prove herself as trustworthy. We're also getting our first glimpse at the true nature of Jude because she thinks she didn't care that mom had told only her to go upstairs. She wasn't going by herself. So basically, no matter what, she would always come back to defend her family no matter what happens. So the start of the nature versus nurture argument begins here with Jude talking about how her dad appeared with an axe in hand, and it wasn't a weird sight for her because he normally was, working or talking about weapons with him and his friends. And I think that's part of the nurture element for her, that even from an early age, she was around weapons and understood them, so she didn't fear them and respected them. But then we get a glimpse at Jude's nature because Jude ran at the man, slamming her fist against his chest, kicking at his legs. She wasn't even scared. She wasn't sure she felt anything at all. So instinctively, she does fight back, even though she just watched this man kill both her parents. The more I think about it, it's interesting that their mother attempted to run away even after Maddox warned her don't, because you would think that after all the years that she was with him, she was even married to him, that she would know his nature well enough to know that it would be dumb to run. But also it's showing like his nature, like he is unable to stop himself even though he doesn't want to kill her. I love this little moment because Jude stares Maddox down even though she's scared, but she's like, I've won plenty of staring contests, and Maddox looks away first, which I think is a slight foreshadowing of their relationship going forward, because Jude would look him down being like, I am not stepping down, and Maddox is the one that looks away, not taking her seriously. Now we're getting another glimpse at nature, but it's with Vivian, because when she says, I will always hate you, I vow it, she has never been in fairy, so she doesn't understand vows, but yet instinctively she knows the power behind them. I love this quick summarization of Maddox's character from Maddox himself when he says, I may be cruel, a monster, and a murderer, but I do not shirk my responsibilities, and we see that going forward. I kind of love this line of Maddox like throwing Taryn and Jude across the saddle, handling them like baggage rather than children, which is kind of how he does handle them going forward, and treats them almost like the baggage he inherited from his wife. This day becomes like the changing point in their lives. So a lot of their actions for all 3 sisters going forward, I believe, are influenced from the events of this day. The first couple times I read this book, because I have read this book numerous times at this point, chapter 1 always threw me off. I'm like, why have it? But now that I think about it more, I think it's supposed to be a bridge connecting Jude from her old life in the human world with her new life in fairy, and how she doesn't quite regret the events that happened. That the only thing that she misses from her old life is that there's no fish sticks, no ketchup, and no television. She doesn't quite miss her family. She doesn't quite miss her old home, her old friends, just those 3 things. So chapter 2 is our first true step into fairy, and we're not easing our way in. We're jumping in immediately with an imp braiding her hair and like describing the imp with like long nails and like black eyes. However, it's also introducing this interesting dynamics where typically humans are deemed as lesser in this world. Typically they're like the bottom of the barrel servants, almost slave-like, but yet there is a creature, a fairy, waiting on Jude, a human. Also, the dynamics of fairy is so fascinating because it's never outright told to us. We just get glimpses and we have to make our own assumptions. And for instance, it looks like all the servants are either, humans who are enchanted and like basically enslaved for a period of time, or lesser fairies that are working off a debt, like an indentured servant. Also, there's a very rigid hierarchy amongst the creatures, with humans included in this hierarchy, where it's determined by how powerful and how ruthless you are. Like, you could be very ruthless like a red cap, but you're not as high up in this hierarchy as like a high fae, because they are both powerful and ruthless. And by the way, note, the power and the ruthlessness plays a role in how Jude climbs up this hierarchy. It's interesting that Tadafel was the one to teach Taryn and Jude how to protect themselves in the world of fairy, but like Orenna does lecture them, but she doesn't really teach them, and Maddox only teaches them on how to be ruthless. And Jude notes that the other humans never interfered. So it's interesting that this servant, who has more of a reason to be annoyed and upset that somehow these humans who typically would be below her or somehow higher than her would have more of a reason not to aid, but yet she does. The interesting thing about Taryn and Jude is that yes, they might be mirror images of each other, but that also means that they are the reverse. So Taryn, I believe, would have always been a settler, whereas Jude would have always been a reacher. And the moment where Maddox killed their parents still is affecting them, because to Taryn, she saw that moment and saw how fast things can be ripped away from you. So she will settle for something that offers stability and comfort, whereas Jude saw how fast her life can turn around for potentially the better, because she actually likes living in fairy. So she might look at an apple higher up in the tree and go, I'm willing to risk losing everything at the bottom if I can get that apple potentially. Also, a great glimpse of Jude's personality and her motivations is when Tatterfell says maybe someone will offer you their hand so you could become a permanent member of the High Court. She says, I want to win my place. Basically, I don't want to be given this. I want to earn my place so then no one can continuously say I should be grateful to be here. Also, we're being introduced to the two paths that the twins are going to take, because Jude says there are two ways for mortals to become permanent subjects of the court: marrying into it or honing some great skill. Jude does not want to marry in it, but Taryn does, whereas Jude wants to hone some great skill, earning her place that way. Actually, now that I think about it, it's slightly ironic that she does also marry her way into it, but that was never her goal. The interesting thing about Vivian and Jude is that they are two sides of the same coin. They yearn to be in the world that they do not belong in. Jude does not want to live in the human world. She wants to live in fairy, even though she is the strange one in that world. Whereas Vivian belongs in fairy, but yet she yearns to live in human, even though she would be deemed strange there. This line's interesting when she says that even though Taryn and I are the evidence of Mom's betrayal, by the customs of fairy, we're his wife's kids, so we're his problems. And in fairy, vows are pretty much like law. They mean a lot. So when a betrayal happens, it's a greater offense. So I think no one would have batted an eye if he had gotten rid of Taryn and Jude. So it means more that he kept them. Which I think that plays a role in like Jude and Maddox's strange relationship. Like, yes, he killed her parents, but yet he kept her. And to her, she could interpret it as he wanted her. The way that Tatterfell styles the twins' hair, I think, says a lot about their personalities and their goals, because Terrence is often loose waves, very dainty, very pretty, very girly, and that, you know, follows her goal of getting married, whereas Jude's is often braided back, like you would want to keep your hair out of the way if you're in battle. It's interesting that Jude, unlike Taryn, has a physical reminder of the ruthlessness of fairy. She's missing the tip of her ring finger, and she constantly touches it as like a reminder of how ruthless fairy is, that if you don't fight back, if you don't become something more fearful, the other fairy will use and abuse you. And it's interesting because Taryn does allow herself to be used and abused. Ooh, I like that in Maddox's stronghold. It's filled with like windows that are like stained glass, but the color of gray, like trapped smoke. And I wonder if it's supposed to be like showing that by living in this home, her view of the world has become gray, like morally gray. Once again, Vivi is the other side of Jude's coin, that she dresses in human styles like jeans and a belly shirt, but she also is reading a magazine that might have an iron staples rather than glue binding their pages, not caring if her fingers get singed. Basically, she's willing to get hurt if she can exist in the world she wants to, just like how Jude is willing to get hurt if she can exist in the world she wants to. Also, the outfits the three sisters are wearing right now are showing where they want to live. So Vivi wearing jeans and a billowy shirt shows that she wants to be in the human world, whereas the twins are wearing stereotypical fairy dresses. Going back to the nature versus nurture argument, it's interesting that the whole reason why the sisters are there is because Maddox came for Vivi because she is his blood heir, but yet Jude is more his child than Vivi ever would be, and she may not be naturally his, but through nurture she is. It's interesting that Rennie is afraid of Jude and Taryn around Oak, even though the two girls are powerless, whereas Oak has power, as we later learn he was able to enchant Jude. But I wonder if it's because Irenia knows that they are so low in the hierarchy that they have nothing to lose, that they would be willing to sell out Oak in order to gain what they've, to gain some power. So in Holly Black's world of fairy, they're beautiful but terrifying, like literally in her annotations here, she says, I love a list of fairies being beautiful and creepy. And I think it's supposed to show that they are exactly what you're gonna get. It's beautiful, but deadly. Wait, I just caught a slight bit of foreshadowing, because Jude says, I can see why humans succumb to the beautiful nightmare of the court, why they willingly drown in it. And it's on one level talking about how easily humans would make deals and trades to be a part of it, why Jude would make deals and trade to be a part of it, but it also kind of is hinting towards that human girl that she tries to save. And when her and Vivienne tried to bring her back to the human world, she had collected rocks and flung herself into the ocean, drowning herself because she didn't think she could live in the human world anymore. This description is interesting though. Ravenna is stepping forward and Jude goes, not another lecture, and grabs Tyrion and charges into court. Meanwhile, Maddox is a heavy step behind them, and I think it's supposed to kind of foreshadow their future because Tyrion and Jude charge into the world of fairy of Tyrion marrying Locke and Jude, creating a coup and eventually marrying Cardan, despite Ravenna's tips and lectures telling them not to do either of those things. And Maddox is always a step behind them, acting as if he's there to help pick up the pieces. So we know that the Greenbrier line has animalistic traits, and it's interesting that Dane is described as having hooves and deer legs, and it kind of matches his personality because he moves with quiet agility. He has this regalness to him. However, deer can do serious damage to cars, and that's kind of how Dane lives his life. Whereas Balkan is the more obvious person that you want to keep your distance from. He's big, he wears his favorite bear fur coat, he has thorns sticking out of his knuckles and arms, and it kind of matches his personality. He kind of is grumbly like a bear and barrels his way through things, and prickly too. Know how Jude says at Balkan's court because the three elder siblings have their own kind of little circles known for certain things? Well, Balkan's is known for merriment, for drinking yourselves numb and taking poisons, but every time she interacts with him he's always sober, at least to her, which I think is showing that he's using that as a mask to look a certain way, but is definitely on a different level, which is exactly how Cardan acts. He acts, with debauchery. He acts like he's a drunk and a fool, but really he's very brilliant. But yeah, it's not very surprising because Balkan is the one that raised him. Oh my god. So I love when Jude says, when Tyrion and I were little, we would hide under the long banquet tables, which makes when the whole thing goes down with the family and Jude and Cardan are hiding under the banquet table, is kind of showing that they're still kids. So Jude talks about how there's normally a ledge that her and Tyrion go to where they can remain hidden but continue to listen to music and watch the fun that down below that they're not allowed to have. However, it's different tonight. I think Tyrion's taking that first step of I want to be a part of it, with her staying down below and eating the food that they're not supposed to be eating. I also love her getting another glimpse at what Tyrion and Jude want in this world, because Jude's watching who we later know is the bomb stealing from someone, being a really cunning thief, whereas Tyrion's watching the dancers, wanting to be on the dance floor. So we get a couple lines from what the song The Human is singing. It's actually inspired by a real ballad, as Holly Black puts in her annotations. The real ballad is called Lady Isabel and the Elf Knight, and I actually know this ballad. I actually discovered it a couple years ago. It looks like that. It's on Apple Music. Highly recommend checking it out. It's a long ballad, but interesting. I'm sorry, I love that the way that we're introduced to Cardan is Jude going, I hate this song, because that always makes me think of someone, and he's the absolute worst. I also like how Jude describes Cardan's friends as his meanest, which they are, and fanciest, yes, but most loyal friends, because we later see that they're really not. I also like how Jude acknowledges that Cardan and his friends are very beautiful, that if she didn't know how terrible they were, she probably would also be in love with them. Well, yes, I agree with everyone. I don't love the tale. Sometimes I like to imagine it's not there. I do appreciate what it does, though, because his family is known for having an animalistic trait, so it's not like it's an uncommon thing. It would actually signify him as being part of the royal line, but yet he hides it, and that's what's interesting. He doesn't want to be a part of the royal family. It's also interesting that Tyrion says that Vivi mentioned that she wished she had a tail, which is interesting because she wants to be a part of the human world so bad, so you would think that she would want to not have fairy traits. When Cardan and his friends walk by, Jude is forced to bow and she thinks, don't look at us, don't look at me, which is interesting because she yearns violently to be a part of this world, and to be a part, you would want to be acknowledged, to be looked at. And all her actions are also going forward, scream, look at me. Even when Tyrion says, stop drawing your attention to yourself, she can't help it. But I think in part it has to play with how even now when she's trying to make herself look small, to be invisible, Valerian grabs her hair. It's what's the point of trying to look small? I'm going to draw attention anyway. Might as well draw it to attention that I want. I love this little bit of foreshadowing because Valerian grabs Jude without any reasoning, and she is very conscious of where her knife is. So for the longest time, I thought when Cardan rips some rings off a random boy who didn't bow, I thought it was just him showing the court, asserting his power, his dominance of, you should be afraid of me. Just doing one act to reiterate that. However, now I'm thinking he did it to draw everyone's attention away from Jude, because Valerian was picking on Jude and he's like, I don't want you to pick on Jude, so how about we pick on this guy instead? A lot of Cardan's actions, especially towards the beginning of You expect me to be a drunk, you expect me to be terrible, to be horrible, fine. I'll live up to these expectations because I apparently can't change your mind. Taryn's reaction when Jude and Locke lock eyes, yeah, I didn't mean to say it like that, but it's very over the top. At first you kind of like go, okay, maybe she's just worried like to draw like Carden's attention back after what just happened. However, it's hinting at Locke and Taryn's relationship and Taryn being slightly jealous. Going back to my nature versus nurture argument, which I don't think I brought up anything in the last chapter, but here Jude's talking about how like fairies all are, have deceptions and they're cruel. And like, for example, red caps need bloodshed the way that mermaids need salt spray the sea. Like this is it within their nature that they can't be any different than that. And it's not that it's similar from like how the rest of fairy view humans as like they are all liars, they can't be trusted. It's setting this expectation and assumption, like you can't disprove it, which is not dissimilar from how Carden lives his life. Like everyone expects him to be cruel and horrible, so he's just living up to this expectations. Jude saying that she's tired of being powerless is interesting because I think that is the exact same desire that the majority of the characters in this series wants, but they're all on like different levels and different scales. Like for Jude and Taryn, they're tired of feeling like they have no control over their lives and whether they can stay or be a part of the society, and they want a little bit more, to be less afraid. Maddox wants it for power's sake, to have a little bit of control and to, shape this world the way that he wants it to be. Carden wants a little bit of power because he feels like he also, like Taryn and Jude, has no control over his life and his destiny, especially after what the prophet said. So Dane wants power, all these other people want power because with power they think they get freedom and get choices. I love we get these little moments that are basically proving that like no matter how hard Jude and Taryn work and try, they will always have certain aspects that set them apart from the rest of fairy. For example, that everyone else smells a very specific way, even if it's, dried blood or milkweed. However, she smells like, pit sweat and sour breath. Or the fact that everyone's, very thin and live, but they have this fleshiness, this human fleshiness to them. And like, even like it comes down to periods they talk about, things like that, like things that give them away. I like the sentence where Jude talks about how like in lectures she'll take a frustrated nod and be glad because it means I can belong whether they like it or not. And I think it's setting like kind of the groundwork of why she keeps moving forward throughout the series. Every time she hits a roadblock and people being like, you don't belong here, she's like, I've heard this my entire life, I'm gonna prove you wrong. In a previous video, I had a theory that I think Carden ripped the wings off that boy in court because he was trying to get the attention off Jude, but I think his friends caught on, so he's trying to get the scent off himself. So like that's why he like kicks the dirt in her food to be like, hi, obviously I don't care about her. But either his friends don't believe him or Jude acting, reacting and fighting back means that he has to keep asserting his power and his dominance, so like, things keep escalating. I love the mirroring of the scene where she doesn't say anything, but she meets Carden's gaze and glares at him, doesn't look away, and it's identical to what young Jude did when Maddox first came in to unalive her parents. She met his gaze, glared at him, and in both instances she knows that she has no power, but she was not going to be the first to look away. I love this line where Jude says, I hate him so much that sometimes when I look at him, I can hardly breathe. And it's just so intense. You're like, whoa, Carden hasn't really done anything but exist. Like, occasionally he makes fun of you, but like, you hate him more than everyone else, like that you can hardly breathe. I also love how badass Jude is. She's like, they want me to be afraid, to be scared. I lived for years with my parents' murderer. I know what it means to be scared and to live with it and ignore it. They can't scare me. Okay, you kind of have to give Carden and his quarter jerks props because calling Taryn and Jude the circle worms is slightly brilliant. With like, when you look at a worm, you don't know which is the top and the bottom, like which end. And especially if it's a circle, it's kind of recognizing that not only is Jude and Taryn so low in the hierarchy, they're worms, but you don't know where Jude stops and Taryn starts, to them at least. Here's another example of like nature versus nurture when Jude talks about wanting to be a knight and Maddox says, you're no killer, it's basically not in your nature. And she says, I could be. I've been training for a decade. I've been nurtured to be potentially a killer, to be fine with that kind of violence. In this moment, you can definitely argue that I think Maddox likes Jude better, which makes sense. The two of them understand one another much more than he understands Taryn. But I'm saying that because when she asked him to fulfill her dream of becoming a knight, he says no. If it's a whim, it will pass. If not, we'll circle back. Whereas a little bit later when Taryn asks if she can marry Locke, he doesn't tell her no. If it's a win, we'll circle back. He lets her make her own mistake. Whereas with Jude, he's trying to protect her a little bit more. Also, I think this is a pivotal moment for Jude because she's literally saying, like, I've kept my head down, swallowed insults, and endured outright threats, and she thought it would prove her toughness, but yet it's literally her dream is being crushed right now. So she's like, why did I do all that? What was the point of it if I'm not going to be able to accomplish my dreams? You know what? Screw it all. I'm going to fight back. I'm going to do whatever it takes. I'm going to fight tooth and nail, and I will go however far I will need to go. You know, the limits, they're out the window now. I'm going to do whatever it takes to get this dream that I really want. You could argue that there's some symbolism in the scene, like right after she's been denied her dream. She's glaring at her plate with the pomegranate seeds shining like rubies, wet with venison blood. Like, the blood is basically, she's literally willing to kill to get what she wants. And I think the pomegranate seeds could infer that she's willing to send herself to hell, condemn herself to hell to get it. We're also getting a glimpse at what motivates her going forward, which is to prove Carden wrong. Because even in this fantasy that she's, you know, drawing in her mind of wearing a beautiful court dress, a sword at her hip, a part of the court of falcons, and Carden there, laughing at her because he knows it's a fantasy. Also, I think the reason why she focuses on Carden and wanted to prove him wrong is, you know, besides the love part, but I think to her, he is like almost the gatekeeper of the fairy because he's the one that she interacts with the most and seems to have the most power, at least in her immediate life. And he's the one that's deciding basically if she can exist in this world or not. Oh my god, I love Maddox saying, coronations are a time when things are possible, change is coming, and there is no wisdom in crossing me. That pretty much foreshadows the events later. Oh my god, I love Irenia says only someone with nothing to lose would attack the throne with you there to protect it. Oh, that someone is Jude. She literally has nothing to lose. Oh my god, this little tell. So Vivi says there's always something to lose, which you could on one level think it's about Jude and how, like, because of her trying to do a coup and achieve her dream, she kind of grows distant from her family for a while. But she makes Oak laugh and Irenia like grabs him and panics like, does she know? I love the way that Jude throws the gauntlet down when she declares war against Kurt and his friends, when she decides I am no longer going to be weak and scared. And it's by like salting his food, which is not a grand gesture. It's not, you know, loudly declaring war, making this big stance. No, it's a quiet little thing where she's just basically saying like, oh, I'm still here and I will attack when you least expect it. So Jude is taking the time to tell us these moments that she thinks makes her who she is today, even though she admits that she's too much of a coward to even think about them that often. But I think in reality, they're just reasons that she's using to justify her actions going forward. And despite wanting to be a part of this world, there are her reasons why she hates fairies and just assumes that they're out to hurt her. It's when her finger was bitten off. It's when one pulled her out from under a table during one of the banquets and made her dance till she was puking and crying. When even Oak glamored her that despite being someone that loves her and she loves him, he can still hurt her. And that's what she expects of fairies. She assumes that's within their nature. It's interesting, out of all the fingers, Holly Black chose Jude's ring finger on her left hand to be the one that has a tip bitten off, because that's the hand and finger that is where the wedding ring usually goes. I don't know what it means just yet. It's like on the tip of my tongue. I know it's important, but I don't know what yet. So the chapter ends with her saying, like, here are the reasons why I don't like these stories. They highlight that I am vulnerable. No matter how careful I am, eventually I'll make another misstep. I am weak, I am fragile, I am mortal. I hate that most of all. And it's interesting because it's kind of illustrating Jude as almost a pessimist. Like, she fully expects to be hurt, to be tricked, to be deceived. And it's even plays in how she loves. But the thing that is interesting to me is that the line, I hate that most of all, made me instantly think of a quote that happens in the second book when her and Carden are hooking up. She's like saying, I hate that I cling to him. I hate that I borrow my throat. But most of all, I hate how I like him best out of all people. And it's the reason why she hates it is because she feels like she's vulnerable and he has the upper hand again. And the reason why she plays the long game and they react is because of how they've kind of been brought up, like how their lives have been up to this point. Jude has always been pushed down in the dirt, and she knows that if she does anything, she's more likely to get in trouble. So she has to be strategic about how she attacks, whereas Kurt and his friends have always had the upper hand. They can always get away with whatever they do, so of course they're going to react because it's always worked for them. Also, this line, Holly Black, amazing. So Jude says, the more they get away with, the more they believe they're entitled to have. brilliant. When Jude also says that she screams and fairy are like bird songs too common to attract much attention, I think it also is playing into the society and how Jude is playing a part of it, how you're not supposed to, I think, in this world, help one another. You're expected to defend yourself, and if you can't, then you're lower on the hierarchy, and that's just life. So you have to fight back. Once again, we're getting the nature versus nurture argument with Nixiya saying Nixies can't help what they are. Basically referring that, like, this is what you should expect. This is within their nature. And on a different level, she's saying, don't expect anything else from us. This is, you know, who we are. When Jude calls out Cardan saying, are you having fun? Are you enjoying yourself? He says enormously. And I think there's two parts to it. I think part of him is probably just happy to be interacting and like near her. But the other part is he hates that he likes her. So maybe bullying her makes him feel slightly better about that. The best part about this being in Jude's point of view is that she lies and dilutes herself and makes assumptions. Case in point, in the scene where she, drowns for a brief moment and comes back up, she sees Cardan stepping in the reeds and she assumes it's because he wants to get a better look at her drowning, but in actuality, he's afraid for her. When Cardan says, and I'll save you, it made me realize that he does save her quite a bit throughout the series, because Jude kind of likes to charge through walls, which is not her fault that the walls exist, but she sometimes ends up falling into holes. But because he is part of this world, he's more capable and able of pulling her back out of the hole. When Cardan says, oh, so you do what I say for her sake, does that feel noble? And I think part of it's him a little bit bitter that she's willing to fight for her sister, but none of his siblings fought for him. And then he continues with saying, well, does it? And she answers brilliantly with, why don't you tell me how you want me to feel? When Cardan asks what it's like being a twin, he says, is it like being doubled or more like being divided in half? And I think it perfectly summarizes the conflict between Taryn and Jude, because it starts with them feeling like they are the same person, they are doubled. But as the story progresses, they begin to divide in half. But then when Cardan asks Taryn, would you make a similar sacrifice? Let's find out. It makes a deal with her, like basically, like as long as you don't defend Jude by word or deed, I won't hold you accountable, to show that she will always be alone. And I think it's supposed to show also like everyone is selfish and that you can't hold your siblings to help you out because mine surely haven't. You will be alone like I am. When Jude thinks it still hurts when she waits towards the bank, but of course she should go. She will be safe and the price is nothing that matters. And I think it's going to be mirrored later on when she thinks that it still hurts that Taryn chose Locke, not her, even though she knows that this is going to help achieve Taryn's dream of marrying into this world. It still hurts. Oh my god, because I love when Cardan says, your sister abandoned you, see what we can do with a few words. And it basically is a perfect example showing how he fights. He doesn't fight with action, he fights with words, and we see it played out numerous times throughout the series. Jude is describing Vivi here as being often selfish, but she's so cheerful about it and so encouraging a cheer for selfishness in others that it's easy to have fun with her. And based off how we've been viewing Fairy so far, it seems that it is part of their nature to be unabashedly selfish. And even on the last, like in the last chapter of the river scene, it seems like Cardan's trying to point out to Jude, stop trying to be noble, that you're deceiving yourself. Everyone is inherently selfish, so look at your sister. And that kind of plays with my personal belief. I think everyone is inherently selfish. Even when we're being selfless, there's a selfish core to it. But like the selfishness could be just appeasing your own guilt. It doesn't have to be selfish the way you think it is. But I think it's just, interesting that fairies aren't deluding themselves. So like, yeah, we're selfish. So also the fairies being inherently more selfish, at least not deluding themselves and thinking that they're not. Their society functions in that way too. They're very self-centered. A lot of their actions and motivations are focused on themselves. They don't help one another. They protect only themselves. That's why you have to fight back, because you can only depend on yourself. And if you're helping others, it's not done like out of altruistic motions. Usually you get something out of it. There's a deal involved. You would think that the outfits that Jude wears while in fairy are like costumes, but to her they're more natural than the outfits that she puts on whenever she goes into the human world. Those outfits she designs to be identical to what she has found in magazines, and when you read it, they do feel a little weird. I wouldn't have worn them, but they feel like something I would have probably seen in like a Delia's like catalog or a 17's magazine, especially like the early 2000s. But like for her, those are the costumes. She doesn't belong in that world anymore. It's interesting the relationship fairies have with the mortal world, because they live amongst them. They're very close, and it's not uncommon for fairies to live in that world, whether they go because they're on the run or they want to be there, they're being excommunicated, or they put their changelings there. And it's interesting the way that they treat them, though, that they mess with them and use them as forms of entertainment. It's almost like how humans treat animals. We coexist with animals, but yet we try to act like we're the dominant one. The brilliant thing about Jude and Taryn is what Jude points out, where if you put Taryn back in the human world, she would be adaptable. She would find her way, and same with Fairy. But I think to Taryn, she probably feels like an alien species, which she doesn't quite fit in either world, but she tries her best. She's bendable. Like, if a gust of wind comes, she'll bend, but she won't break. Whereas Jude is the opposite. She is like a tree trying to plant her roots and refusing to be uprooted, and that might work against the gust. Like, if a gust of wind comes, she might stand strong. However, neither are right or wrong. They both have good and bad. When Jude punches that human guy for trying to flirt with her or like hit on her, and it's all interesting because, one, he did grab her wrist, so I don't think she's totally in the wrong. It is a bit of extreme, but she did grow up also in a world where if someone grabbed her wrist, usually something terrible is about to happen. Finally, we're seeing Jude's motivations, or at least she's more aware that her motivations have been changed. And it's now, though, his threats are the only reason I have to fight, the sheer perverse glory of not backing down. The thing that's motivating a lot of her actions going forward is proving Carden wrong, that she does belong in this world. And after what just experienced at the mall, she realizes I definitely cannot go back to the mortal world. I do not belong there. Wait, this little annotation from Holly Black changes so much for me because, Jude notices Taryn and Carden talking off by themselves, and she puts in this note, this is after Carden realized it was Taryn and not Jude who stole Locke from Nicaea. So that kind of explains why he was being a little bit more mean also previously, because he probably thinks like, oh, if you're gonna like any fairy, why do you like him and not me? I think chapter 9 opens with a great example of nature versus nurture, because I said in my previous video that the Fae in this world are inherently selfish. Well, actually, everyone is, but they just don't delude themselves and think that they're not. And we're seeing on the nurture side that Taryn has learned to be more like that, to act more like a Fae. So she thinks about herself and has her own goals, and I think part of that is making her feel a little bit guilty. So she tells Jude to forget about her and worry about herself. But with Jude, it's within her nature. It's her own instinct to defend her family. And we saw that all the way from like the prologue where she was fighting and kicking Maddox after he unalived their parents, even though the odds were stacked against her. Like, it's just within her nature to defend her family. Also, don't hate Taryn for this. It makes a lot of sense. She wants to be a part of this world so bad. Same with Jude. And they've been watching on the periphery. And so they would obviously mirror the Fae because they want to belong, they want to be accepted. And that's such a normal thing because like in college I participated on like a psych research project where we looked at how humans mirror one another, whether it's mirroring one another's accents or the way we talk or even the way we type. It's very natural to mirror to then feel connected. So in the second paragraph of chapter 9, it starts with Jude holding like a clay mug shaped like a snake and ends with her talking about how Taryn, it looks like a girl who fits inside her own skin, like basically unlike her. However, throughout this journey, we watch Jude kind of shed her old self, shed her old skin, emerging like a snake kind of does. Also, in these first couple chapters, I think a lot of us forget that Jude says periodically that she is afraid, that she has to try to convince herself to be, brave, like a brave knight. And eventually we watch her slowly shed that version of herself, forcing herself to at least act like she's braver than she is, and eventually it becomes second nature. I love these little moments where like she's looking back like right now thinking about how Carden looks so gleeful, as though my fist tightening on his shirt was exactly what he would have wished, and it was. He may not have realized it, but like I love that she's thinking it so negatively, like he's mocking her, but really I think he realized in that moment that why am I so turned on by this? When Taryn says that she could handle the teasing and all those other things if it only there wasn't a witness, if Jude wasn't there to witness. And at first both Jude and I are offended, but then if you think about it, it makes sense that like Jude is constantly the one being like, no, we need to fight back, stand up, stop letting them poke at us. Meanwhile, Taryn wants to be a part of this world, and she recognizes that she can't change how they act, and it's just better to live with it. And Jude's making it hard to pretend like it doesn't bother her. Oh, Taryn, you don't know what you just did. When she says, fix things with him. Prince Carden's got all the power. There's no winning against him, no matter how brave or clever or even cruel you are, Jude. End this before you get really hurt. And you're basically just summarizing what her motivation is going to be going forward, that she's like, no, I will be braver and cleverer and crueler than Carden to prove him wrong. And the reason why she wants to beat Carden is that I think in her head she sees him as almost the gatekeeper to this world. She may not even realize it, but because she doesn't interact with the other royals, she mostly interacts with him, and he's the reason why the other kids, like in class, for instance, don't interact with her and tease her and stuff like that. She thinks that if she beats him, then she'll officially be accepted into this world. At least she stupidly thinks that's what's going to happen. I love that she describes Carden's armor looking more ornamental than protection, which is true. That's, I mean, exactly what he was going for. Like, he does not intend to truly ever get in a fight. He's not good at it, nor does he really intend to be good at it, because that's not his instinct. He doesn't want that. And so, yeah, when he wears armor, he's wearing it as almost a costume, as a symbol to say something about it, because he understands the importance of clothing and what it can say, but he doesn't use it for practical reasons. I never thought about this till now, but Vivi is friends with the royal family. It's mentioned a couple times, like with Princess Rhea or Scuns from Rhea and Carden and some of the others, and she doesn't want to be a part of this world at all, but yet is immediately accepted by the royal family because she is the, you know, head general's kid, whereas Taryn and Jude are also Maddox's child, at least that's how he's claiming them, but they aren't afforded the same immediate friendship like Vivi is. Jude says that after the fighting that no one's paying attention, Maddox's gone, she's done her best, and it meant nothing. And I think this influences why she accepts Dane's deal coming forward. I am struck suddenly by his height, by the arrogant sneer he wears like a crown. He would seem like a prince even dressed in rags. There's nothing I have to say. I just really love that description of Carden. Wait, so after she describes Carden, she then says, Carden grabs my face, fingers splayed against my neck, his breath was against my cheek. His other hand grabs my hair, winding it into a rope, which I think he does a very identical actions later in the series in a more romantic connotation. But right now he's angry, but like that was still hot. And it kind of goes with what Balkan says, I think in the next book, where he says, we're mortals, the line between love and hate is very blurry. So, like, you can see it here. This is a pivotal moment in Jude's journey. This is where she's buckled in the roller coaster and she's not getting off, because she has one final moment of, like, wavering, where she's, like, thinking, you know what, fine, for Taryn, I will beg. I don't have to mean the words, I can lie. But as she's kneeling, she finds that she can't. And this is a moment where she stands up and decides, no, this is not what's going to happen. And she says to Carden, I am going to keep defying you. I am going to shame you with my defiance. You remind me that I'm a mere mortal and you are a prince of fairy. Well, let me remind you that means you have much to lose and I have nothing. You may win in the end. You may scowl me and hurt me and humiliate me, but I will make sure you lose everything I can take from you on the way down. I promise you this. This is the least of what I can do. Moment here also is reminding me a lot of like the Hunger Games, where like Carden and like the capital were consistently suppressing Jude and the rest of the districts to a point where they've had enough, that they are willing to lose everything because they cannot continue to live in this current existence. It's impossible for them. I still haven't quite figured out, despite reading this book I think 4 or 5 times now, why Valerian is so gung-ho about picking on Jude the most. Like, he is definitely the one that goes out of his way and wants to hurt her more. There's got to be a reason behind it. I just can't figure it out. So I've been rereading the Cruel Prince series and doing a literary analysis and posting videos about it. And I've been using my LitJoy copy, which has special annotations from Holly Black. And I just had this spot. So on one page, she notes how Carden initially thought Locke was dating Jude. Like, he knew he was seeing one of the twins, so he thought it was Jude, but it wasn't until later he learned it was Taryn. And then we get that scene where like he made Taryn cry. That's like the note that the annotation Holly Black put in, was that Carden thought it was Jude at first, but then learned it was Taryn. I wonder though if Locke went after Taryn in the first place because he noticed that Carden was looking at the twins and assumed that he liked one of them. And we know from the novella that he seduced Nasia away from Carden. And I wonder he does it in part because, you know, he likes stories, but also because Carden is higher than him on the hierarchy. And I think he wants to see how much he can get away with stealing away from him. Plus he's a fox. So you're going to slyly steal things away because that's what foxes do. But, and he's an asshole. So going back to what I was saying though, I think he, you know, assumed it was Taryn, started seducing her, but then realized that, oh, I picked the wrong twin. He actually likes Jude because obviously Jude's really getting under his skin, especially more lately. And that's when he decides, I'm going to seduce Jude, and then also make Taryn think that this is a whole ploy of seeing if she's worthy of marrying me because he's an asshole. But I think that's why he starts to try to seduce Jude, is because he realized that Carden actually likes Jude, and that was why he actually started going after them in the first place, is just to mess with Carden. And he continues to do that throughout the series. Poor Carden, poor my sweet darling Carden. He really, you see hints of like how unloved he is by his family. In the last chapter in this one, like, we know that the High King wasn't there when the battle first started. He didn't arrive till the end when Cardan basically was getting his ass whooped by Jude, not when, Cardan was doing well. And he just wants to prove his dad, make his dad proud of him. But no, when he emerges to the royal box, like, he ignores the High King and Dane, but they equally ignore him. Sits next to Balkan, who's probably ripping him a new one. And one of his sisters only just then arrives after his battle's over because she's coming to cheer on his other sister. Like, none of them cared about him. I love him. I love the subtlety of, like, Jude consistently rubbing, like, her thumb over, like, the stub of her ring finger as, like, almost a calming thing, but also a reminder of, like, how deadly fairies are. Like, usually she does it when she's, like, uncertain or afraid. Like, right now with her conversation with Dane, when that first starts, she does that. And it's interesting because Taryn's constantly lecturing her about being stupid around fairies and it's going to cause them more problems. But Jude knows firsthand that, like, the true dangers of fairies. But not only that, but, like, you don't even need to do anything and they can still hurt you. Dane is interesting because he comes out at, like, the right time and he knows how to manipulate, but he does it in a way that it doesn't feel like it. And Jude, obviously she's going to agree to work for him because not only is he offering her a position in this world, which is what she wants, but he acknowledges that she is special as a human, that as humans she can lie, and that's special. Meanwhile, she's spent her entire existence in fairy being told that she isn't special, that she's just, as worthy as a worm in the dirt, like, these things. And, like, finally have someone with high power who is supposedly about to inherit the throne acknowledge her and offer her a hand. Obviously that's alluring. After Jude, like, does this thing for Dane where she, like, says a bunch of things and says basically, point out which one is a lie, but the, fun of it is not knowing, but then she realizes abruptly that he may not take any vow particularly seriously from me after that little performance, which goes back to the prologue when Maddox says, what's the worth of a vow from a mortal? Basically proving that, like, they can lie, so why should I trust you? And that's going to be a thing that plays throughout the rest of this book and the rest of the series, which, is it helpful or is it harmful? And this is funny because Jude is automatically assumed to be distrustful because she's human and she can lie. But meanwhile, she's the one that doesn't trust Cardan until, I swear to God, I think, like, partway through book 3. And, like, trust is one of the themes and, like, elements of this entire series because, like, especially in the second book, we see Cardan go above and beyond to gain Jude's trust, which you would think it would be, like, the other way around because Jude can lie. And it's just, I love it. Do you remember a while back when Cardan and his friends threw Taryn and Jude into the river? And when she goes to protect Taryn, Cardan says, what are you trying to be, noble? Like, how's that going to work out for you? Well, right now, she wants to be a knight. She wants to be noble. And Dane instead is offering her a role as his spy. She says, it feels a little bit like expecting a proposal of marriage only to get offered the role of a mistress. Which I think is supposed to show that, like, with marriage, with knighthood, it's more honorable, it's more public of acceptance of them. But with the role of a spy and a mistress, yes, you still get the power and the influence and the protection, but it's not a public acceptance of you. And to continue, I think with Dane offering her the role of a spy instead of a knight, and then with Cardan saying being noble, what's that going to get you? I think it's supposed to show also, if you're going to be noble and live a way of a knight, you're kind of limited in your choices. You have to be a very particular way. But by being a spy, you have a little bit more freedom to do what you want. You just gotta do some steadier things. When Jude says, it makes me feel for the first time as though I have power of my own, a power Maddox cannot take from me, is her acknowledging that the only reason why her and Taryn are allowed to exist in this world with a little bit of respect is because Maddox has claimed them as his children, but that also means that Maddox has total control over their lives. That also their existence of being here is like a gift. They've been gifted it. But she wants to earn her place so that no one can say, aren't you lucky? She deserves to be there. And by accepting Dane's offer to be his spy, she is taking her first step out of Maddox's shadow and earning her place in this world. I haven't really talked about gender expectations yet, but I think Taryn and Jude are the perfect example of following it or breaking it, and especially when it comes to power. Because Taryn right now watches Arenia and tries to copy her, because Arenia is the perfect example of a lady, like, being quiet and delicate, but she subtly manipulates and maneuvers others to gain a little bit of power and to get what she wants. Whereas Jude is more masculine, mirroring Maddox. She's gruff, she's in your face, she's on the front lines. And neither are right or wrong, but they have their limitations and their benefits. For example, going Taryn's way, like, if you get caught, you can manipulate and say, I'm not involved, and find your way out of the situation. However, you also are depending on someone else helping you to get what you want. Whereas Jude has more, like, she can fight for what she wants. However, she's also on the front lines and more likely to get in trouble and, possibly executed, things like that. I also love that this chapter is such a great example of, like, being presented evidence, the actions, and then Jude interpreting Cardan in one way, but if we read between the lines and what we know in the future, that is not Cardan's reaction at all. So like, for example, she thinks that Cardan's stopping Valerian from hurting her because, you know, there's this silent rule of not getting the wrath of Maddox turned on to them. But also that he just sounds bored. But really, if you read like his jaws tense and he sounds almost borderline angry, it's because he is terrified that they're about to kill Jude and he loves her, but he has to slyly help her get out of the situation without drawing attention that he likes Jude, and I love it. And also, this is why I think he gets mad at Locke, because Locke can go up and help Jude and, you know, be sympathetic towards her, whereas Cardan can't. He doesn't feel like he is safe to, because the minute that he acknowledges Jude and is nice to her, he knows that his friends are gonna turn on him and be like, what's wrong with you? Why do you like a human? And then they're gonna try to overthrow him for the power. Like during the scene where Cardan rips the rings off that random boy, Nicaea and Valerian share a look. And they do it again here after Cardan interrupts Valerian from, you know, picking on Jude. And I think that they're guessing that there's something going on here, and they want to see how far they can go before Cardan steps in to confirm their theory. The dynamics and relationship of Maddox is interesting because he's literally storming around being like, tell me who did this because I will rip out their hearts, I will cut off their heads, I will put it on the roofs as a warning. And it's, I think, in part because he does love Jude in a like fatherly way, but also in part because it's a bad reflection on him. If you harm one of his kids and you get away with it, what does that say about him? When Jude says, when I am scared, I can't forget that no matter how well he plays the role of father, he will always and forever also be my father's murderer. And I think it also perfectly reflects and like mirrors the world of fairy for Jude. Like, she can delude herself in thinking that this is wonderful, but at its core, it's still deadly to her. So lately I've been doing an in-depth literary analysis of The Cruel Princess. I've been rereading the books, and previously I made a video talking about one of my theories as to why Locke starts to go after Jude. And I'm gonna tag the video down below for you to watch, but I have another theory or like at least another reason why he starts to go after Jude, and it's him starting to realize that Taryn will eventually become boring, and he likes stories. Because, you know, understandably, Taryn wants stability because her whole life was uprooted when she was a child. And she also has learned that it's better to not rock the boat, to not draw attention to yourself, to keep yourself safer that way. Unfortunately, that means that she's not going to produce a lot of stories for Locke. Whereas Jude is a storm. She comes crashing through, and he literally says to her, you're like a story that hasn't happened yet because I want to see what you will do. Unfortunately for him, during the coronation, when they're dancing, he prompts her by saying, what would you do if I hurt you? She turns and says, I would hurt you right back. And I think he quickly realizes that he can only get away with so much with her before she kicks him to the curb. But I think he also realizes that, you know, Cardan and Jude have feelings for each other, even if they're not fully aware of it. So Taryn is the safer option because he also knows that Taryn is desperate to be a part of this world and she will need him. And if he sticks with Taryn, he can use Taryn against Jude, manipulating the two of them into creating more stories for him. So yeah, I think that's one of the reasons why he starts to go after Jude, but then ends up staying with Taryn. If you like this, and if you want to hear more unhinged thoughts or an in-depth literary analysis, I do talk about other things like, you know, the family dynamics, power dynamics, gender expectations, nature versus nurture, stuff like that. Come check out my other videos. It's interesting that even though Taryn and Jude wear fairy clothes, they lean towards it. It feels more natural to them than wearing what they would wear in the human world. They still wear human underwear. And it's almost as if, like, saying they can put on fairy clothes on the outside and try to pretend like they're part of the fairy world. However, at their core, underneath it all, they're still human. I love that even though she's trying to step out of Maddox's shadow, she still depends on his protection because she, you know, tries to convince herself that Balakin won't hurt me. I tell myself, even if I'm caught, he'll simply turn me over to Maddox. So Jude's in Cardan's room, but she doesn't realize this yet, but she's looking at the books and she's like, oh, this is similar to the books that me and Taryn have for class. And in one of the books have careful notations along one side while the other is covered in blots. And she's like, it looks like someone deliberately broke the pen in half because there's no way to get these kind of ink stains if it wasn't deliberate. So basically, I think Cardan does try, but then he has to act like with his friends like he doesn't care. So I mean, he purposely broke his pen for that. It's also interesting that Alice in Wonderland is one of the stories that Jude's mother used to read to them at bedtime because it's the most like going into the world of fairy. So either Jude's mother read it to them because she could relate and is trying to subtly tell them that the world is much grander than you expect. Or maybe she knew that maybe it would be inevitable that they would end up in Fairy. When Cardan responds to Balkan saying swordplay isn't a game, Cardan says, then why call it swordplay? Basically, perfectly illustrating that Cardan is not a fighter, nor does he ever intend to be, but he is a great wordsmith, that he will fight back with his words, and he's very cunning with them. It's interesting that Balkan's yelling at Cardan for wasting his talents on revelries and your prophetic romances and being drunk under the moonlight when, like, that's the environment you put him in. So, of course he was going to act like that. Like, that's what exactly is going on downstairs right now. I also love that after Balkan pushes it and, like, hits him hard enough and yells at him, Cardan gets up and fights back, showing for the first time that he does know the techniques. Is that he just acts like he doesn't know because he, one, doesn't want to truly fight, but also to lower your expectations. So when he does, you're not expecting it. That he really does know what he's doing. I love when this, like, description about Cardan, his eyes were glittering with a familiar rage, but for once it isn't directed at me. He's on his knees, but he doesn't appear in any way cowed. Basically, he's giving a look to Balkan that is very similar to the look Jude has given to Maddox and to Cardan himself. That you may have me on the ground right now, but I am not giving up. You do not win. When Jude thinks, but watching, I cannot help observing that beneath his defiance is fear. I know what it is to say the clever thing because you don't want anyone to know how scared you are. And I think this is like the first step of her feeling related to Cardan. Like, she kind of understands him, that they're not as dissimilar as she thinks. And this is like the first step towards them being a pair. And I think it says a lot that Cardan could have feelings for Jude, who's a human, and also, you know, want to help other humans when Balkan's been using human servants to beat him. He could very easily despise humans, but he doesn't. At the very end, Jude acknowledges that this is exactly where Cardan learned how to be cruel, and she's afraid of his future, that he could be more terrifying. And it makes it more interesting that he chooses not to be, that he tries to go against everything that Balkan is.